It is Thursday, 6th of July, 2023, and from Nelson Mandela University here in South Africa, and Quebec, formerly known as Port Elizabeth, I say welcome to the Knowledge Equity Network second session.
Thank you, Gino. Dear colleagues, dear participants, welcome to this event. Welcome from the University of Leeds, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for your interest and enthusiasm. So it is a great pleasure for me to be able to introduce my colleague, Gino Fransman. It is a bit difficult to introduce you, Gino, particularly in this event where I'm sure many people will know you in the audience. And for those of you who are not lucky enough to know Gino, I have to say that, well, Gino is a well expert in open education, and he's a true leader in the field, full of energy and also full of talent. We haven't known each other for that long, but Gino, it looks like if we have been rowing in the same direction, rowing in the same boat for many years, I would say even for decades, because we've been working in the same field. Well, Gino Fransman is the founder of the Open Education Influencers Project at Nelson Mandela University. Open education influencers are ambassadors for open education. They work increasing awareness of open education resources. They facilitate the adoption, creation, and licensing of open education resources, including open textbooks. And they also conduct research into student experiences and assist educators with finding open materials to use in teaching and learning. Gino is a member of the Open Education for a Better World Advisory Board. He's the winner in 2021 of the Open Education Global Emergency Leader Award. And now he's an independent member of the Open Education Global. And in 2023, he became a board member of Wiki in Africa. Gino has become a key partner of the Knowledge Equity Network. He was an essential part of our inaugural event, 2022, where he spoke in our summit. And it's a real honor to have you here, Gino, today. And it's a pleasure to be able to work with you and to learn with you and from you. Thank you.
Thank you kindly, Tony, for your graciousness and generosity of that statement. And thanks everyone for joining us. As Tony said, my name's Gino. And yes, we have been rowing in the same direction for a few years. And I think that I said earlier on in session 1 that the last 2 years have seen us rowing in the same river in 4 different countries. And what a privilege and an honor it is to be on the same team as you, Tony. So, who is Antonio Martínez-Arboleda? Well, he's the senior lead for the Knowledge Equity Network, and we shorten that to Ken, just FYI, abbreviation joke there. He's originally trained as a lawyer. In 1998, Antonio started to teach at the University of Leeds, where he is also currently academic lead for open educational practice and co-director of the Center for Digital Research in Education. He's taught courses on digital literacy for open practice for a variety of academic international audiences and has directed projects including developing OER, Open Educational Resources, podcasting for students, poetry translation because he's so multilingual, and then employability for students as well. Antonio's delivered keynote speeches at conferences in Japan, Brazil, Spain, Greece, the Czech Republic, and Mexico, amongst others. And as an academic and educator, he has 25 years of experience of teaching, research, and leadership. His latest research, with publications in English and Spanish, of course, focuses on student audiovisual feedback.
Thank you, Gino.
So let me share a quick overview of the session, and you're welcome, Tony, briefly about the session format and a suggestion to participants and audience members, and that's you watching, to drop any questions in the Q&A chat box, not the chat because maybe that's disabled. In which case we will engage after each session if the questions relate to that aspect that we've been discussing. Otherwise, we'll field questions at the end where we have a Q&A opportunity for everyone. A couple of prompts will also seek to gather some information from you in the wider global community. Your voices matter. This is knowledge equity, so that means all voices are important and sought after in our engagement. The social media tags are displayed on the screen right now for your real-time and post-event posting, including our Twitter handle, okay, Knowledge EN. The presentation is an introduction, just a quick word about that. We're not here to speak down or speak up to people. We are here to introduce the network, the declaration, and motivate you to become signatories along with us. See more about the Knowledge Equity Network by engaging with us online. And here's the information about how to reach human or digital resources from Ken across multiple spaces for more engagement. Finally, look out for forthcoming Tastes of Ken sessions where you get to learn more about what we introduce today.
Humanity is facing huge problems, such as health inequalities, the climate crisis, economic instability, poverty, and forced population displacements. One of the barriers to the creation and delivery of effective solutions is limited access to the knowledge needed for solving global challenges. To solve that problem, we need to build a collaborative community across individuals, institutions, and nations.
Universities are superbly placed to create and share knowledge, working collaboratively to tackle inequalities, benefit society, and drive change. Through the development and enactment of the Global Declaration on Knowledge Equity, we will capture our collective commitment and aspirations to reduce inequalities through increased access to knowledge. This declaration sets the intention for achieving knowledge equity through the creation of a diverse network spanning virtual and physical spaces.
The Knowledge Equity Network will foster an environment where knowledge is shared more equitably, unhindered by barriers of cost, time, geographical or national borders. We want to make it easier for those who can use the knowledge to be able to access it. By unlocking access to the latest groundbreaking research and offering research-led, challenge-focused education at scale, we will help to solve the biggest challenges facing our planet.
The Knowledge Equity Network will mainstream openness, accessibly and inclusively, among learners, educators, researchers, institutions and organizations that are equally committed to the fundamental principle of knowledge equity. It is about how to network, how to collaborate, and how to bring the research, education and societal impact that universities deliver to the world. We're inviting every party involved in higher education to join us, all those who can help us create the momentum and think about different perspectives, solutions and opportunities for us to approach opening access to knowledge for everyone, everywhere. As higher education institutions, we cannot continue as we are. We need to take on this radical change through relentless collaboration.
We have worked with partners around the globe to set out a challenging but realistic declaration that will be at the heart of the Knowledge Equity Network. Through the network, we will engage in the open exchange of best practices and strategies to achieve the goals of the declaration, and we've set a challenging target of 2030 to achieve this. We've been really heartened by everyone who wants to be part of this movement, who wants to be part of this coalition of the willing to change the world. Together, we have the collective power to make this positive difference.
We are keen to engage with senior leaders from higher education institutions, with policymakers, funders and publishers who share this vision for fair and equitable access to knowledge.
Please join us. We can change the world. Let's not be driven by competition, but by generosity.
Let's be stronger together. Let's work together on how to truly be a globally effective network that can make the world a better place.
Thank you, Gino. So that was a video from our Vice Chancellor, Professor Simone Wittendick, and from our Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Nick Plant, explaining the challenges that we face. Gino will talk about those challenges in relation to Sustainable Development Goals. And to summarize the words of Professor Wittendick and Professor Plant, limited access to knowledge and inequality are a problem. And knowledge equity is the solution that we, from universities, need to offer. So I'm going to share my screen to start talking about the definition, if we can have a definition of knowledge equity. Should we define knowledge equity and provide a text or a sort of dictionary style definition of knowledge equity? Well, I personally think it's a very difficult job to do. We cannot really provide a precise definition of knowledge equity. I think we all agree on the basics of what equity means. This is a very generic definition. Equity, unlike the notion of equality, is not about sameness of treatment. Equity denotes fairness and justice in process and in results. I would like to think that equity is a universal concept. In each language, there is one or more words that refer to this idea of equity as something distinctively different from equality. However, very often, those words in all the different languages are not perfectly aligned with each other. To me, defining equity would require a great international effort, philosophical and linguistic, that perhaps would take many years. And we would have to detach ourselves for this exercise from our own linguistic system, our own individual cultural universes, and even, why not, perhaps invent a new universal word for it. And what happens with knowledge equity? Wikipedia provides a definition, a social science concept, and there in your screen you have an introduction to it. However, in my view, this concept needs updating because it's a concept in the making, knowledge equity. So when we think about applying equity to knowledge, and I mean codified knowledge, knowledge that can be recorded and easily transmitted, it is important to look at the last 25 years. Why? Because since the end of the 1990s, there has been a substantial body of research, activism, education, public policy on a number of topics that are very much related to knowledge equity. Open science, open education, equality and inclusion, and there have been even recommendations from UNESCO in the field of open science and open education resources. All this research, all these practices, these policies, all this international work, all contribute to provide the flesh, the content to the more abstract idea of knowledge equity. So bringing all together is one of the big innovations of our declaration of knowledge equity. We recognize that there are many connections between the work to be done in all these areas that you see on the screen, the efforts of all the professionals and organizations involved in this endeavor respond to the same rationale. From the perspective of universities, the driving force of open education, open practice, open research, equality, inclusion, diversity is knowledge equity. And in the declaration, all those endeavors converge under the same collective ambition. All these concepts are implicit and explicitly included in the declaration, and Gino will refer a bit more in depth to them later on. So what approach should we take to define equity and knowledge equity? Knowledge equity cannot be defined globally with words. So I suggest to be pragmatic and apply the principle of subsidiarity, which in this case means two things. Define knowledge equity through action and define knowledge equity more locally, looking at each national institutional context. And be mindful that even in the same context and in the same situation, we may have different solutions for the same problem because there are different ways to seek equity, and that's fine. Through dialogue, collaboration, respect, we can find compromises at local, regional level of what equitable means in each case. So equity is also a disposition. We can look at our work, at our institutional policy with an equity lens. We can question what we do institutionally and personally from an equity perspective. Equity has to be considered a direction of travel. So instead of defining equity in this network, we need to create the conditions for equity to be defined in the process of doing, in the process of acting locally and globally, in the process of tackling from our universities the challenges that our world is facing, but acting collaboratively. And yes, so that perhaps you may have some questions. May I remind you that we have opened our questions and answer tool. But if not, if there are no questions, we can continue with Gino.
Thanks, Tony. So I can respond to your query about questions, and there are none for now. And again, let me echo Tony's motivation to you attendees. We really want to know what you think. Okay, and the only way for us to engage with you, and we want to engage with you, is if you engage with us using the Q&A tool, as Tony says. I'll share my screen. So, look, we all know there are multiple challenges that our world faces. The UNESCO Sustainable Development Goals, or commonly abbreviated to SDGs, help us to address these as either individuals or as combined, as groups, as communities of practice, organizations, institutions. And in this way, we are able to approach aspects of challenges that humanity faces. And we are all committed to the Sustainable Development Goals, obviously some more than others, but there are factors that are extenuating and that influence the level of commitment, but also the level of awareness of the necessity of committing to the Sustainable Development Goals. There's not a single one of these goals that don't rely on, like in one way or another, on greater levels of access to quality education, not a single one. Achieving these goals requires that humanity, that our future generations and the current generation has a much better education, and so importantly, quality knowledge and equitable knowledge. That's what we are for today. So we're speaking about universities, but remember that the actors in the declaration are being invited as either individuals, organizations, institutions. So these could be higher learning, higher education institutions, but likewise institutions. Universities are committed, right? Education is crucial for all of them, for all of us. And the endeavor there is research for human progress. Equity is central to the Sustainable Development Goals. And usually these are not achievable by working individually. We need to come together.
Wonderful, Gino. Thank you so much. So I'm looking at the questions and answers, and there are no questions then, but I think this is a good symptom, because people must be thinking very carefully what they want to ask, which is fine. Take your time to ask good questions. And I'm going to continue sharing, and I'm going to talk about universities and knowledge production. So, universities are best placed to make a difference for Sustainable Development Goals. Research and education, two sides of the same coin, are the fuel of human progress. Higher education generates research outputs and supports the learning of qualified professionals across the world, people that are needed in business, health, education. There is no single achievement, technological, scientific, educational, humanistic, that couldn't have been achieved without the contribution of higher education and the contribution of so many people, teachers, researchers, educators, librarians, technologists. We need to ensure that we remain relevant in society in the face of all sorts of challenges, including, for instance, artificial intelligence, and also in the face of wider cultural changes, for instance, in the way people prefer to learn nowadays. There is no challenge or goal in the world that does not require more research and better research. There is no challenge in the world that does not require greater levels of access to education. And that knowledge is key. And the knowledge production and transmission chain, is crucial. Now, our system of scientific knowledge production and transmission looks very modern and shiny, as you can see on my metaphorical image there, with all sorts of data and tools. This system of knowledge production and transmission has adapted to some of the affordances provided by the internet as a medium. However, our knowledge creation and distribution system is rather imperfect. It works somehow, it looks great and efficient, but I believe that it's not fit for purpose, and not fit for the purpose of knowledge equity, not for the purpose of tackling the challenges of humanity. Our system currently is based actually on the same principles as the old pre-internet system. Our system is based on the techno-economic paradigm of the print, restriction to access based on scarcity of paper to print, a system based on competition, system based on individualism, and is not fit for purpose also when it comes to the artificial intelligence revolution. In the area of open education, we have made great progress in the past 2 decades. A UNESCO recommendation, investment in repositories, important research and educational activism, a lot of conferences and a thriving community, but there is not sufficient mainstreaming of principles and practice of open education. And the people who work in this field, we are currently a minority, both globally and in our own institutions. When it comes to open research, the situation is relatively similar. There is a very important grassroots movement of academics and publishers fostering alternative journals with the support of organizations such as Coalition S. There are global declarations like DORA, which are informing and leading this transformation to ensure greater levels of openness in research. There has been a lot of great work done. However, most universities in the world lack the expertise and knowledge to drive these agendas. They also lack the resources because acting individually is very costly. Pay for access is an obstacle for many universities. The cost of access to knowledge that is actually produced by the universities is disproportionate for many institutions. So what is equity, knowledge equity here? It's not about not funding publishing. Publishing has a cost and requires funding. It's about working with publishers and supporting actively new business models for publishing that allows these activities to be affordable and reasonably affordable for everyone. There are numerous challenges ahead, obviously, and substantial transformations take time. But the only way forward is collaboration between institutions, researchers, and publication outlets, both existing publishers and alternative emerging publishers based on different business models, with encouragement of the participants in our network. So I
Yes,
don't know if there
Tony,
is
I
any
do
questions.
have some question.
Oh, fantastic, wonderful.
So, okay, so I'm going to read out one of the questions, and it's from Dr. Robert Farrell from the Global Open Education Resources Graduate Network, shortened to GoGN, but also from the Open University UK. And I'm going to just field this question because I think that The second question, which is from Richard Poinder, I'm going to direct to you, Tony, okay? So Robert has asked, how do we know when knowledge equity has been achieved? And are there indicators that we can use? And he has a follow-up little phrasing to that question where he asks, oh, is this something more qualitative and intuitive? I think, Robert, an easy answer right now is that you are going to be a metric of whether or not knowledge equity can be achieved or has been achieved here. This is crowdsourcing solutions to global problems, and knowledge equity is going to be, I think, more evident or visible when we see the people in the room reflect a diverse group of people, more so than it does at the moment, because if we think about like positionality and context and all of these things, like it's a very not so diverse grouping right now. It doesn't mean it's bad. It means that there's opportunities for us to increase the equity aspect of knowledge access, right? I think that the network and people who are signatories here will also then start to become the researchers of what is equity. Has it been increased? Is there more access? What else can we do? And also, what can we learn from one another? This is why there's a network. The declaration is a guideline or a framework, but we are the actors. Like Tony said, we are action-based, and this network has to go out there and make sure that equity becomes a reality instead of like these highfalutin words that we keep throwing out there and academicizing, if that's even a term. Robert, I'm happy for you to keep pushing these ideas and thoughts and questions and challenges also into the Q&A, and we'll try and deal with these a bit later. Tony, to you, I'm reading Richard Poinder's I think consternation here, which is that I'm struggling with the fact that what you were saying seems so in conflict with the way the open access movement has led to a situation in which Nature, the journal, now charges authors, wow, $11,690. That's very specific, to publish an article. Tony?
Yes, fantastic. Just to remind Robert, knowledge equity is a direction of travel. But Richard, you're absolutely right. It's it's a very regrettable situation that there is such a big cost for institutions and authors to publish articles. What I meant by progress within the open access movement is that there are some principles that are helping to define different types of open access, and they are encouraging different business models in which there is non-for-profit organizations, in which there are collaborative endeavors, in which there are organizations that are supporting universities to create new journals, in which these type of costs are not being imposed on authors or institutions. I think open access, the open access movement is providing the tools, but that doesn't mean that obviously the results are being delivered. And you're absolutely right. It's a situation that needs to change, but it only can change if we can persuade universities and new publishers to embrace new principles and new business models. And if we can persuade also authors, to publish in these other outlets, because you cannot force people not to publish in Nature or not to publish in other outlets. Are there any other questions here that we need to answer now? There is something here about Gino, about evaluation and assessment of our declaration goals.
Can we tackle that towards the end, maybe?
Yes. I have an answer for that, but we can answer later,
Thanks, Tony. So let me speak about the Declaration on Knowledge Equity. And first we ask, of course, what is equity and what is equality? And I think that this visual helps us to just visualize literally that equality is not the same as equity. I come from a country that suffered under the restriction called apartheid for decades, and it was so difficult. And when we came out of this in 1994, everyone was jumping up about equality, but then very quickly we realized that equality and like opening up access to opportunities for everyone wasn't doing the desired sort of action or having the desired result. Equity would literally then mean that there would be some actors or stakeholders who would require additional support or resourcing or opportunities, right? So what's the declaration? Well, it seeks to enable engagements with equity while foregrounding diversity and inclusion as part of what's within reach, actually within reach. So sometimes you see those boxes to stand on. We need platforms from which to launch equitable stakeholder involvement or engagement. This engagement is commonly variated along factors like politics, socioeconomic means, data access, Africa connectivity, and so many more. So the declaration is thus published in multiple languages. And this is important because it increases access to the network's aims and activities, all the while inviting wider participation. The network and the declaration is a living organism, right? It's not that we've just set something up in isolation and said that from the global north. And somebody was asking, how do we make this more equitable, right? I am from the global south. I position my work, my life as being from the global south, but I'm active in the global north. That doesn't mean that it's just English. And I think that there's no African-based language that the declaration has been translated into. Again, we're looking at you as actors, as potential signatories to the network to help us expand access and awareness of the network so that more activity and engagement with the network can be enabled. Here's a quick question. What's social justice and knowledge equity? So we'd like to ask you two things, and please type this into the Q&A. Prompt number one, because this is a global community here, and like we said, we don't want the global north to tell the global south. We don't want the global south to tell the global north. We want to hear from everyone so that we understand where perspectives may be the same or differ and how we learn from one another. The two prompts are, is equality the same as equity? And more importantly, like right now, what we want to know from you, what does knowledge equity look like in your context? And this is your country or your culture. We're not going to spend time waiting for this now. If you type in your question, your suggestion, your feedback to these prompts, we'll engage with it towards the end.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gino. We have questions. It's becoming a lively discussion here with Rob Farrow intervening again. Thank you, Rob, for that fantastic contribution. I agree with you, and thank you for helping me to answer that question from Richard before. We also have Caitlin Carter. Caitlin was asking about evaluation and assessment. To be honest, I think we need to include in our evaluation of the success of the declaration and the network a lot of qualitative assessment. I think we shouldn't fall in the trap of trying to numberify, try to metrify everything that we do. I understand that we come from a culture where, you know, people look at figures, and, you know, very often projects are looked at with indicators, like if it was the spreadsheet of the balance sheet of a company, and you look at the minus and the plus. I don't think we should follow that route. That doesn't mean that we don't care about whether we achieve more or less. Of course we can. We want to achieve the best. but there are so many things that cannot really be measured, and if we haven't started yet to deliver, I think the time to define those parameters of assessment will come in the next years.
Great stuff, Tony. I'm going to go forward and deal with the next section, and don't worry, we will come back to these questions shortly.
Wonderful.
Of course, it becomes so much more difficult now. So just let's go to some quick key concepts of open education and open research. Why? Because knowledge equity means that we should all try and be in the same room, understanding the same terminologies. And some of these terms have been used so often that some of us in the community as open practitioners take it for granted that everyone knows what we are speaking about. But how do these terms also help us to understand knowledge equity? Well, we're just looking at 4 terms, right? We're looking at open science, open licenses, OER, open education resources, and then open access. Well, open science, and Tony spoke about the UNESCO recommendations for open science a bit earlier on. And under those recommendations, open science is used as the umbrella term, where open education resources, open innovation, open practices, and a whole bunch of other things are lumped underneath. Why? Well, I think that it's really important for us to also acknowledge that funding bodies are demanding open access more and more now, okay? International policies and organizations are popping up all over, where open is one of the focus areas. There's a call for and a need for the democratization of knowledge production. Again, somebody asked about Global South, Global North. Global South cannot be pillaged much longer for all of these natural and intellectual resources without the appropriate attribution. We've got free access and reusability. That's an imperative right now. At Nelson Mandela University, our students have to sometimes make a judgment call between like the purchase of a textbook and eating. That's not right, and these are social justice issues. And then we look at innovation at the service of social good. Open licenses, therefore, enable us to use intellectual property in different ways than in that little circle with a C on the inside called copyright. It means that there are other ways for us to put knowledge out there that would assure, or at least suggest very strongly, that the intellectual property can be used, reused, repurposed, retained, all of these things, and I'll speak about those 5 R's next. But basically that we can put stuff out there that doesn't just belong to something, and we have to ask for these almost debilitating permissions for us to use it in productive ways and in various spaces. So open education resources, and we look at those 5 R's, and I know that other people will now say, well, there are 6 or 7 R's, right? Just the basics means that these 5 R's, which are permission for using OER or open educational resources, means that we can retain, so make and own copies. In South Africa, again, like I said, it is so challenging just to have access to learning resources. Why? Because we're making value judgments due to lack of financial resources sometimes. We can reuse, that's meaning reusing in a wide range of ways. Revising, we can adapt, modify, and improve. This also means recontextualize. So the Global South doesn't need to be listening or reading a text from Canada where someone is speaking about walking in the snow. We don't normally have snow in the Global South, well, not mostly here in Africa anyway. So the context matters, right? The names of the people, of the actors, of the stakeholders matter. The names of towns and countries matter. We can remix under those 5 R's. That means we can combine 2 or more OER and make something else. And then finally, of course, to redistribute. And that is making access to knowledge possible across different media. This can be hard copy, digital or soft copy, print, not printed. Again, the point is increasing the levels of accessibility and engagement. Finally, open access, and we're not going to speak about open access in this session because this is a complex and complicated dimension where we invite you to speak to Johan Roerich, and Johan spoke at KEN 2022 in Leeds at the launch of the summit, and you'll be very intrigued to hear about what he says about open access. Tony, any questions?
Well, we have questions. We have a question from Sue Lincoln. How will the network approach and or incorporate the issue of global inequalities between the global south and the global north? And you started to answer all that, but perhaps this is the time to give it a bit more content.
Yeah, so I feel like you just left that for me.
I can answer it as well.
No, don't worry. So how will the network approach? I think I just touched on this, right? I think that one of these sort of imperatives for the network is to open up engagement. And that means firstly to put out more awareness raising opportunities there for people from the global south, because in the global north, it's very often that, well, a lot of people have access. They are part of these conversations. The universities are having these conversations. In Africa, we were having a sort of university-wide engagement a couple of weeks ago where I presented, and Tony joined me and co-presented with me. Thanks again, Tony. And what we understood very quickly was that there was a basic lack of awareness, and the lack of awareness translated directly into a lack of engagement or exploration. So we need to up those levels, and unfortunately right now, the barriers to engagement include a lack of resources, a scarcity of drivers to engagement as well. So how are we as a network going to increase that access to awareness so that we can actually then say that inequality between North and South becomes reduced? And also, let's just remember, there are spaces in the global North which are resource or awareness lacking, right? We sort of polarize these two spaces too quickly by saying that the global North has and the global South does not have. That's also a bit discriminating at times. So let's just take care in how we do engage with this, because knowledge equity, like Tony said, also will involve aspects of respect. And I think that respect means that we explore instead of assume sometimes of who is in the room, who's not in the room, and the reasons for this. Tony, I'm going to go over to you. I see that we've got 15 minutes left. So
yes,
it's over to you for Knowledge Equity Network.
Wonderful. We will answer the question of Richard, the second question of Caitlin, the second part, in a minute. And any other questions that may come up. We haven't forgotten about yours. So let me see. Yeah, I'm going to talk about the knowledge equity network, our idea of the network. Let me find my, yes. The network is, it is worth remembering at this point what the network is. The network is simply a group of professionals and organizations that have agreed to pursue the objectives of the Knowledge Equity Declaration as a collective. So the network itself is not an organization as such. You don't have to pay a fee to be part of it, for instance. The network is not a traditional entity. So what is the network? It's simply the coming together of people and organizations around the declaration. That is our bond. So by signing the declaration, we commit to help each other to achieve those objectives, because no institution or no individual can, in isolation, undertake this crucial mission. So within the network, we expect a lot of diversity in the way we relate to each other and in the way in which we articulate our collaboration. The network cannot be prescriptive as to how we organize the actual work. It could be through projects that institutions decide to join or not, depending on whether they think it's interesting for them in achieving the objectives of the declaration. So the network is ambitious. But the ambition of the network is simply the ambition of the signatories of the declaration. We are action focused, so the actions of the network are the actions of the signatories. All this means that there will be institutions who go faster in certain aspects of the declaration objectives than others. There will be institutions that will follow different paths from other institutions because their starting point is different or their order of priorities is different, and that is absolutely fine. And that is what I mean by the terms that you can see on the screen, variable geometries and multi-speed. The question of leadership is really important. Since the network is not a traditional entity organization, the leadership has to be shared around the specific actions and specific areas of policy. It is crucial that in the spirit of equity, our endeavor brings together institutions and professionals from the global south and the global north. And I think if you look at the list of signatories, we are doing very well in that respect. So how do we deal with asymmetries, differences between members, different institutions in size, in type of institution, in levels of funding, different countries, different languages, and different individuals also in our personalities, our backgrounds, our professional expertise, etc. So there are a few principles here. First of all, we need to create spaces for collaboration, spaces for exchanging knowledge, and for initiating conversations about concerted action. The participation in these spaces will be optional. Nobody will be pushed into a specific working group or specific project. We recognize that there are different ways to pursue the objectives of the declaration. What we need to do is to promote communication, conversations from within the network, from within each of the institutions and professional spaces, communicate about engagement, about what we achieve. However, we recognize that total openness is not possible. Sometimes there will be discussions that are sensitive and conversations that concern only a specific group of universities or professionals within a region of the world. So that's what we mean by as open as possible and as close as necessary, because very importantly, we need to build trust. Institutions need to feel safe and confident to approach each other and talk about actual collaboration. Trust is crucial, and trust takes time in building. Finally, diversity and asymmetries are challenges for which we are preparing ourselves, but we believe that diversity is actually a big asset. We just need to explore equitable synergies and equitable opportunities that are generated by our differences. We all have a talent, we all can play a part, but very importantly, our relationship within the network has to be equitable, and we are very mindful of what that means. Yeah, I think we can move to more questions, Gino, don't you think?
Shall I just do this final piece and then we have the Q&A like coming up in literally 2 minutes then?
Wonderful, wonderful. I can see a lot of questions here. Yes,
Thank
go
you,
on. Yeah.
Okay, I shall go. So let's speak about the drivers or the challenges of to knowledge equity. Well, firstly, and I spoke about this before, and I think this also again touches on a couple of the comments there. Who is in the room? Is it just people from one demographic? Is it people from one culture? Is it a multicultural space? And is that space agile enough to incorporate different vantage points? I think that's very important. As academics or as professionals out there, reward, remuneration, recognition for working in open is sorely lacking. And if you look at policy development globally, those people who need those policies to actually help or support them most are usually, like Tony said, the small community of actors globally and the tiny actor or actors within the institution. So those policy reach us last very often, and that's that's really discriminatory towards access. And it raises the question, how do we make this access more equitable? I think that when we were in Leeds, Prof. Nick Plant had also spoken about, well, sometimes the bigger actors would need to subsidiarize the smaller actors so that access there is enabled and not just assumed. One of those modes of access would then, I think, refer to connectedness, connectivity. Does everyone have access to the same like data connection, resources? Like, do you even have these implements or these tools that many of us take for granted and assume or like just expect other people to have in terms of their ability to be part of the voices in this room? Again, awareness. Do people know about the network? Do people know what open education is? Have you spoken to others who are not in your community of practice about open? How are you doing this to raise awareness, but likewise to capacitate people with the skills to take that awareness themselves and expand the reach of the network? Our question to you here is, like, what else? What are these drivers? What do you see in your communities, in your institutions, that either make knowledge equity possible or make it bigger, a bigger challenge? This is a call for you right now. Sign the declaration, the link is there. And of course, knowledge equity means and dictates that you'll have access to this presentation, as well as to some additional information about how to sign up after this session. Right now, the list of signatories, and I know that this has increased since our first session this morning. I did not update the slide, but as of this morning, we were 94 individuals, 11 higher education institutions, and 13 organizations. A quick word: don't sign up as your individual without having your management committee or the executive actually endorse what we're trying to do. If you are intrigued, if you are motivated or like just inspired, what we are suggesting right now is that you can join the network as a signatory, as an individual, and then take your individual advocacy into your network or organization and increase, like we said, the expanse of the network. We'd like to ask you again, what are the challenges to knowledge equity you may have to share? And how do we address these challenges? You are the experts out there. So as being part of this network or being privy to what this network is hoping to do, we really hope to engage you with this. And Tony, I'm open to those Q&As for right now before we will wrap up the session.
Fantastic, fantastic, thank you. There are several questions here. Can I answer one of them?
Yes,
I'd like to answer one of them quickly, and then I can pass you some others. In relation to Caitlin Carter's question, how can other similar collaborative efforts in different countries best collaborate with your network? That's a great question. So we are not trying to create a monopoly of knowledge. We recognize that there are a lot of good people and good institutions working and organizations working in the same direction as the Knowledge Equity Network signatories. So what we are doing is we are establishing contacts with these organizations, asking them to become signatories if they wish to do so, and asking them to help us to organize events, to contribute to our events, and offering also our contribution to their own events if they want to invite people from the network, because obviously we recognize that effort, we recognize the quality of those contributions, and we would like to be part of what they do and them to be part of what we do in as much as possible. So yeah, we are open to that type of collaboration, and there is evidence of it in the conversations that we have had for future events. So you can contact us on that point. And
brilliant.
Gino, there are questions here from our friend and colleague Paula Corti from
Yeah, I see this.
Yeah, yes.
So Paula, I'd like to just quickly repeat your question and then speak to it. So Paula's question was to follow the direction indicated and explore a better dialogue across cultures. Is Ken going to offer organized opportunities for the community to exchange experiences and learn from each other under the Ken umbrella? I think that's a brilliant question. And yes, and this is one of those opportunities. Okay, of course, we need to expand the engagement aspect or element of this. Like I said at the beginning, this is an introduction to Ken, as in what the network is, as well as what the declaration is. And it actually leads you to becoming signatories in this network so that we can create more communities of practice. And again, those communities of practice, like Tony said, don't have to be institutionally sort of set amongst one another, but could reflect a diversity of either cultures, types of institutions, aspects of equity that we are each trying to sort of drive towards. So yes, Paula, and if you have any ideas about this, I know Spark Europe and so many other things that you are part of, please reach out to us, give us suggestions, see where we can support you as well, or any of you in this group. Robert Farrow, GoGN, Samantha Ahern, OE for BW. I know Anya was part of the first session. So these are all opportunities for us again to invite other people in so that we can network, we can speak, we can share, we can learn from one another, but also I think more importantly, set up additional opportunities for others to become involved. Tony, does that answer this adequately for you?
That is wonderful. Thank you. There is a contribution here from Samantha Ahern that we haven't looked at, but basically, you know, yes, Samantha, entirely open science and open data initiatives, University Open Press. We are really committed to those initiatives. And we look forward to people who have expertise in those areas to contribute to the events within the network. And there were questions as well. If you want to, I don't know if you want to deal with those, Gino. There was a question about indigenous knowledge, which is something that the declaration actually includes a provision for. Yeah, it's a question by Richard Poitner. I think open and reuse has also to be seen in the context of indigenous knowledge. Absolutely, absolutely agree with it. Yeah. And I don't know if Gino want to add anything.
Yeah, I don't think that what we are trying to do here is to prioritize any sort of cultural production of knowledge. I think that what we are trying to do is to be more inclusive, but incorporative also, that when we are sharing sort of about indigenous knowledge, I mean, there are different ways to address things, to speak to points in different contexts, which I think requires a broader conversation and another opportunity, like Paula has suggested, to have engagements where we speak about kin and indigenous knowledge and how that is disseminated also. I'm keenly aware about the time constraints, and out of respect for all of you and your wonderful contributions and presence here to this launch, I'm going to move to this final slide, because here's where we can say something about, you know, how you get into contact with us. Before I read that final little dialogue, Tony, would you like to say something in conclusion?
No, I think this has been an interesting session. I think we had interesting questions and contributions, and I look forward to seeing everybody within the next weeks, months, in future events. And thank you to you as well, Gino.
Well, thank you, Tony. I just see that there is something there from Chris, and Chris asks if the focus of Ken is just academic knowledge. And I can say, honestly, no. I think that where we are presenting from situates us in the academic sort of community, but this is why we are trying to achieve equity by more inclusivity. And like Tony said, the network and the network stakeholders would be the broadening of access from diverse peoples and diverse groups of peoples. So please, if you do have ideas and suggestions about this, here are all of our contact details of Twitter. Please go out and tweet. We need to have some social media presence. And as we end the session, Tony, do you have something? Sorry.
No. I just wanted to say to Chris that the idea is that academic knowledge is enriched by different actors coming from outside academia. So this is one of the premises of open research, open science, that we are inclusive in the knowledge that we produce academically. So it's not about covering, news, not, knowledge producing newspapers, for instance. It's about involving external agents, people external to academia in academically produced knowledge.
Perfect. Thank you, Tony. It's quite a mouthful. So everyone, as we end the session, we just wish to attribute the amazing support, and I was told not to do this after this morning, but I'm doing it. Watch me. We want to just say thank you for the amazing support and generosity of Tom Freeth and Fiona Middlebrook from the Ken team at the University of Leeds in this endeavor and in our presentation. Thank you to Salha Abdu for sharing slides from the recent eLearning Africa conference in Dakar. Brilliant contribution as always, Salha, and Salha is also a key partner. We are grateful to be part of the Ken Vision led by Leeds Vice Chancellor, Professor Simone Buitendijk, and the DVC, Professor Nick Plant. Thank you to an amazing colleague and friend, Antonio Martínez-Arboleda, I still love saying your name, and for such a firm support system and amazing insights. All of you attendees, firstly and finally, again, thank you for being here and for engaging. You will be contacted by us shortly, right? Reach out to us using the contact details shared here if you have any questions, suggestions, feedback, challenges to what we're doing, and help make knowledge equity real wherever you are or where you want the world to be. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye from us.